when Kenya's financial institutions started sounding the alarm of a strange rise in cyber attacks back in 2010. Most people, including the government, assumed it was just a passing phase. A few rogue techies poking around the system. Nothing serious. Kenya's elite detectives were expected to step in, clean up the mess, and restore order. Easy. But what started as isolated breaches involving a few thousand shillings stolen here and there quickly escalated into something much more dangerous. These weren't random thieves. They were methodical, undetectable micro-heists, repeated again and again. The kind of attacks known in hacker circles as salami slicing. And while the public slept, millions were bleeding out of the banking system in tiny untraceable slices. Soon enough, corporates and state institutions weren't just concerned, they were panicking. Something serious was happening behind the scenes. That's when a man named Calvin Otieno Ogola was brought in. On paper, Mr. Ogola was the guy you wanted when digital ghosts needed to be tracked. By 2012, he had already built a reputation as one of the most skilled cybercrime detectives in the country. He wasn't just finding hackers, no, he was finding the best of them. But here's the twist. He didn't arrest them, he allegedly recruited them. Instead of breaking the ring apart, Ogola reportedly consolidated it, bringing the sharpest hackers in Kenya under one umbrella. The result was something the authorities never saw coming. A supergroup of cyber criminals, the kind of squad you'd expect in a Netflix docuseries, not in real life. And it had a name, Forkbombo, a name that will soon echo across East and Central Africa, feared in banking halls, whispered about in boardrooms, and monitored closely by intelligence agencies. Members include names like Alex Mutuku, Reuben Kirogithi Mangi, Erick Dickson Njagi, Godfrey Gachiri, and Erickson Macharia. Individuals who started out running petty scams but graduated into orchestrating multi-million shilling cyber heists that made headlines and enemies. What began as a government-led crackdown had quietly evolved into one of the most feared underground operations in Africa cybercrime history. Welcome back to Shadows of Justice, where we break down the realest crime stories from Kenya and beyond. If you are into untold stories, digital heists, and the dark side of power, tap that like button, smash subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the madness. Let's get into it.
But before we go further into this rabbit hole, I need to pause here and talk to you guys directly. If you've been following this channel for a while, you've noticed we've been quiet, too quiet, and here's why. We got hit with a lawsuit. Back on July 15th, we dropped a video about the Akasha cartel. We told the story of how the Akasha family rose and fell and how they played the justice system like it was their personal playground in the early 2000s. We dug into public records, referenced credible news sources, and only talked about what was already documented, nothing more, nothing less. But the crazy part, the video is gone, completely wiped, not because we wanted to, but because legal pressure forced it down. And this is where it gets real. We honestly believe this lawsuit isn't about facts or defamation, it's about silencing. It's about making sure people like us, small creators, students, people without resources can't shine light on stories that powerful people want buried. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and it's expensive. Legal aid is helping, but the truth is, fighting these cases costs money. Money we don't really have. That's why we are reaching out. If you believe in what we do, if you think stories like this deserve to be told, we are asking you to support us. Every little bit counts. Even the smallest contribution makes a huge difference. Because here at Nairobi Insight, we don't run from tough stories. We don't hide, we don't stay silent. We believe in telling the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the people in power. So, if you are new here, subscribe. If you've been riding with us, thank you. And if you want to help us fight this legal mess, you already know.
By the end of 2012, a major shift occurred. Mr. Ogola was quietly dismissed from the DCI's cybercrime unit, and although the details surrounding his exit were never officially disclosed to the public, whispers of internal conflicts, untraceable cash movements, and unexplained intelligence leaks filled the silence left by the government's refusal to explain what truly happened. But by 2013, with Ogola now operating far from the government oversight, the hacker group that had once begun quietly collecting crumbs from vulnerable financial systems began to evolve into a highly coordinated digital cartel, dismantling some of the most sophisticated cybersecurity infrastructures across East and Central Africa and stealing vast amounts of money from banks, telcos, and private companies without ever having to physically step inside any of them. In one particular devastating incident, a prominent bank headquartered in Upper Hill, Nairobi, which continues to remain anonymous to this day for fear of triggering public panic and an irreversible crisis of confidence, experienced a breach so severe it exposed the deep flaws in Kenya's banking cybersecurity infrastructure. Yet, the story was quickly buried before it could dominate headlines. It all unfolded during an ordinary week when most of the bank's employees had already clocked out of the day, leaving behind only a handful of IT technicians and night security guards stationed at key entrances when the attack began to quietly unfold in the background, completely undetected. What followed was a slow and calculated infiltration, with hackers quietly siphoning funds from customer accounts through a single computer terminal that had been physically connected to the bank's network week earlier. A device that had somehow passed through internal vetting and quietly sat within the system, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came, and when it did, it hit hard. One by one, customers began receiving SMS alerts about small, seemingly random amounts of money being withdrawn from their accounts. Some dismissed it as a system glitch, while others, especially the more digital-aware users, took to social media to express their panic, demanding answers. But by the time the bank's leadership realized what was actually happening, it was far too late. Over 400 million Kenya shillings had been siphoned out, distributed into ghost accounts and cryptocurrency wallets in what will become one of the most audacious digital heists in Kenya's history. And just like that, Forkbombo proved that in a world where everything is connected, it only takes one unnoticed entry point to bring down an entire financial institution. As Forkbombo's influence spread deeper into Kenya's financial and digital infrastructure, their tactics evolved from crude hacks into a complex network of remote infiltrations, social engineering, and deeply coordinated inside jobs, some involving the silent placement of rogue computers inside server rooms by paid insiders, while others were pulled off entirely from a distance using digital fingerprints and phishing scripts that left almost no trace. It wasn't brute force, we can actually say. It was surgical. In every breach, they never had to pull a trigger or a weapon. just a well-placed exploit or a planted device, and the system gave them exactly what they wanted. And every time another institution was robbed, cybersecurity experts would be called in post-attack, scrambling to explain how millions could vanish in a system supposedly protected by firewalls and protocols. More often than not, investigations, especially those conducted by firms like OnNet Africa, will point to a recurring digital footprint, a single email address found buried deep in the logs. That email will go on to become the group's unofficial signature and eventually the name that will haunt East Africa's banking sector for years to come: Forkbombo. By 2013, one of the key players, Alex Mutuku, had already begun making headlines long before the general public even knew who he was. While still a freshman at the University of Nairobi pursuing a degree in information systems, he developed software that gave him unauthorized access to the Daily Nation's entire e-paper archive, essentially breaching a national media house just for the thrill. And for him, it was only the beginning. And by the way, we did a full deep dive into Alex Mutuku's criminal rise in another Shadows of Justice episode. Definitely check that out after this one. Thank you in advance. Later that same year, Forkbombo will pull off its first major coordinated heist by infiltrating the judiciary's financial system, gaining backdoor access to treasury approvals, and tricking the government into disbursing 80 million Kenya shillings in fictitious payments to shell companies set by the gun. By this time, their operation wasn't airtight. CFC Bank, now Stanbic, flagged the suspicious payments and called Judiciary Finance Board Benedict Omolo to verify, triggering an internal audit that unraveled the fraud. And just like that, 4 Forkbombo operatives, Achoka, Bokela, Mangi, and Murathe, were arrested and charged. Although they were convicted nearly 7 years later in January 2020, by the time the gavel fell, Reuben Kirogithi Mangi had already climbed the ranks and become one of Forkbombo's top decision makers, coordinating heists with nearly military precision. Over the next 4 years, Forkbombo executed a wave of digital robberies targeting commercial banks, government systems, and private companies, and even though they occasionally slipped up and got caught, most of them will simply pay bail, walk free, and vanish into the shadows only to strike again. The methods kept evolving. In December 2014, Alex Mutuku and Stanley Kimeu Mutua were arrested by the DCI for infiltrating NIC Bank's internal systems and accessing sensitive customer data. The two then reportedly attempted to blackmail the bank, demanding 6.2 million shillings to keep the breach quiet. And here's where it gets deeper. They didn't ask for Kenyan shillings. They asked for bitcoins. At the time, one bitcoin was going for around 31,000, and their total ransom demanded was pegged at 200 bitcoins. A bold move considering cryptocurrency was still a gray area in Kenya, unregulated, untraceable, and perfect for digital criminals who wanted to stay 2 steps ahead of the law. Court documents later revealed they also managed to steal 2.88 million from the bank during the attacks, and though the money belonged to NIC, not individual depositors, both Mutuku and Kimeu were granted bail and released after posting 700,000 shillings each. 3 months later, Kenya's biggest telco wasn't spared either. On February 19, 2015, Safaricom systems were breached and hackers siphoned 3.6 million shillings worth of airtime. A bold move that exposed even the most guarded digital infrastructure in the region. Just weeks later, the same system was reportedly exploited again, with 20,000 shillings of airtime topped up to a single line registered under the hackers. Once again, Alex Mutuku was on the radar. Although he denied the charges in court, WhatsApp conversations between him and a contact named Paul Nderito were retrieved and used as evidence. Still, with a paltry 20,000 shillings cash bail, he walked free and unsurprisingly returned to the digital underworld. By 2016, Forkbombo had evolved once more, this time through a merger with another shadowy hacker called Grabzone, which had been wreaking havoc in retail chains since 2013. Grabzone's method was analog but effective. They forged received documents, partnered with corrupt supermarket employees, and walked into stores with fake proof of purchase to collect expensive goods. It was a mix of low-tech fraud and high-level coordination, and when combined with Forkbombo's sophisticated hacks, it made the gang nearly untouchable. And while the exact figures stolen by Forkbombo during their reign of chaos remains a mystery buried in redacted reports and sealed files, security experts estimate their total haul from 2013 to 2017 to be well over 400 million shillings, a staggering amount that shook Kenya's digital future and proved that in the information age, your greatest threat isn't always a man with a gun, but someone with your password. By the time Forkbombo's Kenyan operations began to crumble under the weight of police scrutiny and internal missteps, the group had already transformed into something far more sophisticated than the average criminal gang. It had developed a full-fledged organizational structure that bore a striking resemblance to a legitimate corporate enterprise, complete with hierarchies, management protocols, and what some insiders even described as performance targets. At the top of the food chain was none other than Calvin Otieno Ogola, the former DCI cybercrime investigator who had allegedly crossed over from law enforcement to digital crime leadership. In every sense of the word, Ogola functioned as the gang CEO, tasked not only with overseeing day-to-day operations and major heists, but also with maintaining the delicate balance of trust among financiers, hackers, and insiders. These financiers, essentially Forkbombo's version of shareholders, were the money behind the madness, investing heavily in hardware, bribing insiders, and even funding legal bail whenever things went south. Below Ogola were mid-level commanders like Alex Mutuku and Reuben Mangi, both of whom had already earned their stripes through years of successful heists and court battles. Their role was operational. Their coordinated hacking assignments supervised the technical teams and ensured that no breach was made without proper planning, scripting, and digital camouflage. And in 2017, they came out swinging. That year began with what will be one of Forkbombo's most brazen attacks yet, a well-planned cyber heist targeting the Kenyan police circle, a cooperative society so closely linked to law enforcement that some of its clients were the very detectives hunting Forkbombo. The irony didn't go unnoticed. In a move that felt more like a declaration of war than a simple robbery, the group reportedly made away with 50 million shillings, sending shockwaves across security agencies and triggering an immediate internal probe. The Sacco heist may have been one job too many, because it was around this time that detectives began closing in, surveillance intensified, phone lines were tapped, cyber units were mobilized. Forkbombo had finally drawn the attention it had long avoided. Then, something unexpected happened. In March 2017, two American nationals, Larry Peckman II and Dennis Hutron, flew into Kenya. At first, their arrival didn't trigger much suspicion, but once digital forensic teams traced back their communication, it became clear they had been in frequent contact with Ogola and other high-ranking Forkbombo members. According to DCI intel, the two were not tourists, not aid workers, and not digital nomads. They were associates, and likely part of a larger international link the gang was attempting to build, possibly to expand its operation beyond Kenyan borders. But instead of playing their part in Forkbombo's expansion, Larry and Denise became the gang's weakest link, and it didn't take long before detectives used them to penetrate deeper into the gang's latest plot, a massive infiltration of the Kenya Revenue Authority. This wasn't just any digital breach. This time, Forkbombo was planning to access KRA core systems via a laptop secretly planted in the agency's server room, giving them unrestricted access to taxpayer records, payment systems, and disbursement channels. Investigators will later reveal that a former KRA officer named Edward Kiprop Langat was believed to be the insider who had smuggled in the device, allowing the gang to move undetected inside the country's central tax infrastructure. But their timing was off. Barely weeks after the operation was initiated, the DCI moved in with a wave of arrests. Ogola, Mutuku, Langat, a hacker named Wambugu, and the 2 American nationals were all rounded up and charged in connection with a scheme that had caused KRA to lose an estimated 3.9 billion shillings. It was at the time one of the biggest cyber-related financial crimes in Kenya's history, and it marked the beginning of the end of Forkbombo's reign. With Mr. Ogola now in custody and his most gifted protege, Alex Mutuku, locked away for a grueling 40 days before he finally secured bail, the once dominant digital empire that was Forkbombo found itself at a critical crossroads. For the first time since their rise in 2013, the group's operations didn't just slow down, they nearly flatlined. It was as if the gears of a well-oiled cybercrime machine had jammed. The arrest had sent a chilling message across the digital underworld, and even the most loyal insiders began to question whether the era of Forkbombo had finally come to an end. But in every vacuum, there's always someone ready to fill the void. Enter Reuben Kirogithi Mangi, a man who had long harbored ambitions of taking the throne. Quietly observing from the shadows, Reuben had been one of the earliest recruits into Forkbombo's elite ranks, brought in by Ogola himself. He had paid his dues, withered his share of courtroom battles, and built a reputation as both a talented hacker and a cunning strategist. It was Mangi who was among the first to be charged for the infamous judiciary heist, where 80 million shillings was siphoned through forged payments to shell companies that had never delivered a single item to courts. In that operation, Mangi paid his own company, Mark Hertz K Limited, a healthy 6.6 million shillings. Meanwhile, his Forkbombo comrades cashed in through their own phantom funds. Henry Achoka took 12 million shillings via Bonanza agencies. Duncan Bokella bagged 7.5 million shillings through Integrated Real Estate Service, and Martin Murathe walked away with 3.9 million shillings under the banner of Williams Logistics. It was digital money laundering masterclass, executed with Kenya's judiciary of all places. But things didn't go smoothly for long. Mangi and Achoka were 2 players in that operation, key players. Eventually absconded court, vanishing from legal oversight 2 years after being formally charged. And yet, while many assumed that Mangi had gone underground or left the game altogether, he was in fact biding his time, waiting for that one moment when leadership at Forkbombo would falter. And when it finally did, with Ogola behind bars and Mutuku's influence waning, Mangi made his move. He quickly rallied the 4 remaining senior members of the original gang, Erick Dickson Njagi, Godfrey Gachiri, and Erickson Macharia, men who had seen the glory days of Forkbombo and weren't ready to let it all fade away. Mangi sold them a vision: regroup, restructure, and rise again, but this time far from Kenya's tightening grip. Together, they launched a fresh recruitment drive, adding 4 new names to their cybercrime syndicate: Dedan Muchoki Morioki, Samuel Washira Nyaguto, Damaris Njeri Kamau, and Steve Maina Wambugu. These weren't just foot soldiers. They were digital operatives with specific skill sets, each brought in to support the group's second arc. By 2019, Mangi had managed to lead the group across borders. The new Forkbombo rebranded itself quietly and crossed into Uganda before heading to Rwanda, a calculated move aimed at staying one step ahead of the cybercrime surveillance net that was now cast wide across Kenya. But they didn't go unnoticed. By this time, security agencies across East Africa were no longer playing thorough. After years of hemorrhaging millions to faceless hackers, regional cybercrime units had begun to share intelligence, monitor cross-border movements, and even set up joint task force. In a way, Forkbombo's growing notoriety forced governments to unite against a common threat: digital bank robbers who never needed to carry a gun, only a laptop. And as Forkbombo resurfaced in Uganda, the cat and mouse game that had started in Nairobi's tech backstreets had now gone regional. As soon as Reuben Mangi and his newly rebranded Forkbombo Syndicate quietly slipped across the Kenyan border into Uganda, alarms started ringing. The year was 2018, and although Forkbombo had vanished from the headlines, they were far from inactive. In fact, they were planning one of their boldest moves yet. It didn't take long before Interpol Kenya picked up on their movements, and in a swift and formal alert, they warned their Ugandan counterparts. A high-level cybercrime gang was heading their way. The warning was clear: millions could be lost, and fast, if something wasn't done. But as history had shown, Forkbombo never moved without a plan. By June 2019, Mangi and his crew had already embedded themselves deep inside Uganda's financial veins. Their target: Development Finance Company of Uganda, DFCU Bank. Using their signature playbook, they planted 2 junior bank employees and used them as pawns. Their mission was textbook: Forkbombo, get your people inside, slip the malicious software into the system, and then let the code do the rest, slowly, silently. What followed was a salami attack, a term familiar to cybercrime analysts, where tiny slices of money are quietly siphoned from hundreds of accounts, amounts so small they are barely noticeable, until a mountain of stolen cash is amassed. Over the course of 1 month, the bank systems leaked 700 million Ugandan shillings, equivalent to 21.4 million Kenya shillings, and DFCU didn't suspect a thing. But Mangi wasn't done yet. This wasn't about a quick payday. It was about bleeding the institution dry. Rather than buy old debit cards from desperate customers, Forkbombo created dummy bank accounts, then used real deactivated ATM cards cleverly collected by the rogue employees under the guise of routine renewals. The crew reactivated the cards using their advanced hacking tools, and then, without ever stepping foot inside a vault or showing a weapon, they robbed the bank from the comfort of anonymity. Then came the big sweep. In mid-July, the software that had been steadily draining the accounts suddenly triggered a mass withdrawal of 8 billion Ugandan shillings, roughly 244 million Kenya shillings in one final blow. It was a digital heist of unprecedented scale. But like many banks before them, the FCU's internal monitoring systems had failed to detect any red flag. By the time executives even realized something was wrong, the money was long gone. Panic set in, the bank called the police. The rogue employees were arrested. So were 2 money mules. Locals recruited to physically withdraw the funds, but for Forkbombo, the operation was already a success. Or they thought. Mangi and his team laid low for 4 months, enjoying their spoils and watching the smoke clear. But they weren't done. They had their sights set on a new location, Rwanda. It didn't take long for Kampala's authority to forward intelligence to Kigali. The minute Forkbombo crossed into Rwanda, the Rwanda Investigation Bureau, RIB, and regional cybercrime units were ready. The Syndicate landed in Kigali in October 2019 and began their scouting mission. This time, they planned to strike 4 banks, including a familiar adversary, Equity Bank. But Forkbombo had underestimated one thing: Rwanda's intelligence strength. When the group attempted a trial run by trying to breach Equity EasyPay system. The system held its ground, the hack failed, and instead of pushing harder, the crew backed off, sensing they were being watched. They were right. Equity Bank's Kigali branch had already caught wind of the syndicate's presence. The internal security team began piecing things together when reports came in from low-income locals, house helps, and casual laborers who had been approached by suspicious men offering them jobs that involved receiving and transferring large sums of money. These people were being recruited as money mules, and many of them were smart enough to know something was off. Some of the recruits contacted Equity's security division, others informed Rwandan authorities directly. The trap had been set. From that moment forward, RIB detectives started tailing the crew, listening in on conversations, and in some cases even turned mules into double agents, feeding live intelligence to the police. Equity's IT team ramped up defensive countermeasures, ensuring any unauthorized attempt into their financial systems would be flagged in real time. Both the bank and the state lay in wait, patient, prepared, and watching every move the syndicate made. And just like that, the hunters had become the hunted. Eventually, it will be the money mules, those low-level recruiters often overlooked in these digital crime thrillers, who will bring the mighty Forkbombo Crew to their knees. You see, the walls were closing in. The surveillance, the undercover monitoring, the recruitment leaks, it all pointed to one outcome. And in the dead of night, just minutes past midnight on November 1st, 2019, the Equity Bank Kigali internal monitoring system screamed a silent warning. Something was definitely wrong. Anomalies were detected deep within the bank's system, and the IT security team instantly knew what they were up against. They didn't need guesses, they had confirmation. The Forkbombo Syndicate, led by Reuben Mangi, was attempting another major heist. Only this time, they weren't facing the Kenya they once outwitted. They were facing Rwanda, a state with arguably the swiftest criminal justice system in East Africa. And Rwanda had laid a trap so well constructed, so synchronized between bank and state, that the moment the system was touched, Rwanda Investigation Bureau detectives moved in like shadow. Swift, precise, and relating. The crew didn't stand a chance. In a matter of hours, the Forkbombo chapter closed, and for the first time in years, the hacker cartel that had bled East Africa's financial institutions dry was disbanded under force of law. And here's where it even gets crazier. Despite being a complex case involving cross-border crime, encrypted systems, and multiple defendants, Rwandan courts took less than 2 years to convict the entire crew, a process that included the delays of the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns, and judicial slowdowns, which means if the world hadn't shut down in 2020, justice might have been served in less than 12 months. But don't get too comfortable, because while Forkbombo may be history, the blueprint they left behind is still alive and very active. According to Onet Africa, a leading cybersecurity firm, several hacker groups in East Africa had picked up the baton and are still draining institutions of millions every year. The most dangerous of this successor, a splinter group formed by Forkbombo members who rejected Reuben Mwangi's leadership. They call themselves silent cards, and just like their name suggests, they don't brag, they don't talk, and they don't leave digital fingerprints. Yet, in 2019, the same year Rwanda was taking down Forkbombo, silent cards pulled off a record-breaking heist on a Kenyan bank. 400 million shillings was gone without firing a bullet or triggering a single alarm. That remains one of Kenya's biggest digital heists to this day. So the question now is, if this was just a snip-off, what happens when the original creators of chaos inspire the next generation of criminals? So what started as a group of rogue coders and small-time digital thieves mutated into East and Central Africa's most feared cybercrime cartel. From Kenya, Uganda to Rwanda, the Forkbombo Syndicate proved just how vulnerable even the most fortified institutions could be when attacked not with guns but with code. They didn't need masks or gateway cars. They needed access, one email, one insider, one compromised laptop, and just like that, millions vanished. And while the names have changed, the blueprints they left behind still out there, still evolving, and still deadly. You see, justice may have caught up with Forkbombo in Kigali, but it came years too late. For the countless victims left in their digital wake, the millions lost, the systems breached, the trust broken, these scars remain. And what scares cybercrime investigators today isn't just the memory of Forkbombo. It's the rise of new groups like Silent Cards, a next-gen threat born from the ashes of Forkbombo, operating under the radar, adapting with the times, and silently rewriting the rules of financial crime. So next time you see a random transaction alert on your phone, or wonder why your data seems just a little too easy to access, just remember, this war didn't end in Rwanda. It just went underground. Nairobi Insight.